message.
Judge Napolitano is on the phone right now. Judge, thank you for joining us. You just heard death penalty. What is your first thought?
My first thought is that I'm surprised. I honestly thought it was going to go the other way.
Why?
Because the population base in Massachusetts is so stridently and consistently against the death penalty, and has been since before any of us on this call and in this in your studio were born, going back to the late 40s. Nevertheless, this is a clear, consistent, triumphant win for the government. You know, if the verdict had gone the other way, if it had gone to life without parole, it would have been a classic, catastrophic loss for the government. They spent about $10 million in this prosecution, and Tsarnaev's lawyers offered to plead guilty in return for life in prison a year and a half ago. So the government did what it thought was the right thing, and it emerges triumphant. And as one of my colleagues just said, this sends a resounding message to the rest of the world. Now, bear in mind, this is a recommendation from the jury to the court. The judge, technically, legally, has the authority to reject the recommendation. I have not heard of such a recommendation being rejected in the modern era, but there still is another step in which the defense lawyers will argue to him that he should reject it. It'd be unlikely for him to do so, but he has the legal authority to make that choice.
Judge, this is a rare loss for Judy Clark, his defense attorney, who has fought and won many a highly emotional, charged death penalty case. What do you think is going through her mind?
Well, I don't know what she expected, and as brilliant as she is, and at least may know her, at least Will may know her, we know her of her reputation, and it is made by taking very difficult cases and prevailing. But obviously she can't control the cases that come to her.
Well,
I don't
again,
think
let me just give our viewers some background. Susan Smith, the mother who drove her children into a body of water and drowned them. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Zacarias Moussaoui from the 9/11 case, 2002. He's a 9/11 suspect. Eric Rudolph, we remember him, charged in the Centennial Olympic Park bombing. She was successful in most of these, if not all.
Now, the difference in those cases and this, without getting too into the weeds, is that they were guilty pleas. The jury did not hear the horrific testimony that they heard in the guilt phase of this case. The Zacarias Moussaoui case, the government completely dropped the ball. The prosecution was utterly botched. They grossly overcharged him. I'm not diminishing these people's crimes by characterizing the government's behavior this way. Nor am I diminishing her reputation. Her reputation is stellar, and it remains. Nobody wins 100% of their cases.
Defense attorney apparently, and we are just hearing this now, specifically requested that each jury member, one by one, say, did they agree with it? One by one, they all stood and said yes. Lisa, is that a matter of pomp and circumstance?
Yes, it is.
What is that?
I can't remember a trial where a defense lawyer didn't ask for that, because there is that possibility, that small possibility that one could step back from that. But I think the judge
blurt out and say, I can't
really
do it.
I think the judge said something very important.
They all said yes, by the way.
Yes.
They had no problem saying yes to execution.
Which is that this jury, unlike some of the others, had heard not just the penalty part of this. The penalty part actually was a very, not a small part, but, smaller than the trial part, where the prosecution was able to bring in victim and family and victim and family after victim and family. The same jury, not another jury, got to decide on penalty. So I'm not surprised that it was that quick, because they'd heard it all. They probably walked into that jury deliberation, 14 hours ago, and many of them already knew what they wanted to do.
Again, Eric, Judge, and Lisa, they tried to pin this on the older brother.
Right.
They tried to say that he forced his 18-year-old little baby brother to do all of this. That did not fly, Eric.
Well, so you have to deal with the case that you're dealt. As a defense lawyer, you can't make your cases picture perfect. You have to deal with it. And that was their best defense. It was a long guilty plea, essentially. They knew he was going to be found guilty, but the target was to keep him alive. And that's where they did not.
I think where they may have lost that defense, too, is that when after the big brother is dead, you know, he rolls over him in the car. That's when then we have the boat and the horrible messages and all of that. Right. So if he were so, you know, under the spell of the bigger brother, then he would have just surrendered.
Okay, let me just say we're seeing a little bit of activity. Judge, you can't see this unless you're watching the monitors. A little bit of activity right now. We remind our viewers that this courtroom was packed with victims, survivors of this, including the family of the little 8-year-old boy who was killed, the youngest victim in all of this. We suspect, although we cannot be sure, that some might come before those cameras and those microphones and speak. The second that happens, we will, of course, let you have it. But again, Judge, maybe this is a sea change for the state of Massachusetts. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. It's a very good question, excellent question, and it's the juncture of law and politics, because it is essentially a political will for a population base to say, no matter how horrific someone among us may be, and no matter how harmful their deeds may be, we don't want them executed. Bear in mind, if this were a state prosecution, and theoretically Tsarnaev still faces the same prosecutions in state court. I don't know if they're going to go through with it, but they have the right to do so. But if there were the state if this were a state prosecution, the death penalty is off the table. It doesn't matter what the jury thinks. I don't think this will change the opinions of the population base. It is still on a liberal conservative scale considered a very, very liberal place, perhaps one of the most in the United States
Judge,
of America.
Can I just bring up the state of California? And I'm a native of California. I remember being a young child, and I come from a pretty darn liberal family, but my father was so pro-capital punishment, as were many people in California, and a judge named Rose Bird fought the will of the people who had wanted the death penalty.
Yes.
I mean, it's sort of the louder voices of the few overpowering what the people really want.
Well, you bring to mind, and again, Lise knows this as well, you bring to mind a fascinating era in California history. She was not just a judge. She was the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court, and her steadfast resistance to the implementation of the death penalty effectively got her removed from the court, which is almost unheard of, that a judge would be removed from the court because of the judges being at odds with, again, the population base. But that's what happened. I can't predict what's going to happen in Massachusetts, except to remind you that California has gone back and forth on the death penalty, and Massachusetts hasn't had one since 1947.